this morning session, and now we have the lecture. And the lecture given by Viktor is on mathematics of known fields and large-scale brain networks. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it on? Can you hear me? Excellent.
Sorry, more information. I get an email from the CRM. They would like to have a photo for all the audience. So the photo I just proposed at the end of this presentation, having a photo for all of us. Just be here for 5 minutes for the photo, please.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I put several slides together. I didn't know exactly when I was here yesterday. I changed my slides completely. So now it's a accumulation of individual snippets, and we can work a little on the board. We can work with the slides. Let's simply have some fun. Yeah. So Habib told me 1 hour, and afterwards you shut up. Yeah. So that's what I'm gonna do. Yeah. He said it politely. Yeah. First thing I want to do is we saw some data. Let me show you one more time a little bit of seizure data. This time a little more dynamically, and we're going to interact a little bit. This is what it looks like. Implantation and sideways you go in. Yeah. And then we were this. But I would like to use a speaker. No, that should be a problem. Well, yeah, this just is. But I'm muted, so it should. Say again.
Okay.
The speaker here.
Okay.
And there, all you saw is you still hear, yeah, movement primitives, the rocking of the bazin, the singing, all this stuff. Yeah. So this is what we find in normal human behavior, and essentially, here you see some critical activity, some of the large population spikes, and this is actually in the frontal lobe, and it's a frontal lobe seizure with some temporal implications. And then it moves towards here. Here, these areas, which is on the brain, located posterior to it. And then you see the signatures that we saw earlier, low amplitude, fast discharges, zzz, becoming bigger. And that's actually in the temporal lobe. Down there. So true network that organizes itself and then propagates and evolves into the discharge state. So this is what it looks like and how it's accompanied. Yeah? It's not something you can. Do I have something else? Yeah. reorganization, changes of the data features. I wanted you to recognize not getting anywhere with with statistical approaches. Yeah, we need something that is capable of capturing non-stationarity. Non-stationarity in the sense of you need higher statistical momenta, yeah, in order to describe it. Yeah, if you choose a statistical approach. Yeah? So it has an onset, it has an offset, and it has the evolution in between. Yeah. So that's one thing. I'm showing you another seizure. I'm going to show you a few other seizures to give you a feeling. It's another implantation. This is typically the software the clinician looks in. You have the electrodes represented here. This is a unipolar representation. Seizure of theta is here. These are some artifacts. Unipolar. Yeah, and then we can zoom in. One. There you see some to the top right. You see represented here some of the spikes that are preceding the activity, and then the spiky structure, the artifacts going through the data. And seizure and same seizure, but now a bipolar montage. Yeah, I will ask you questions afterwards. Yeah, 3 seizures I will show you. Yeah, same seizure but bipolar montage. Yeah, brachial activity. You look at these huge spikes. Yeah, very nice organization, accompanied by some activity down here. This is temporal lobe, A1, A2. Here we are in the hippocampal regions. Yeah, amygdala, hippocampus, not far from each other. I'm zooming in. Same seizure as before, unipolar, but now the spiking pattern in the bipolar montage you see much better. Another seizure, also bipolar, so different seizure now. Bipolar. Brachial activity, something weird, fast discharge, then it stops, silences, organizes itself here. Brachial activity continues here. Here we are in hippocamp, amygdala, and this again temporal lobe. And then this is what it looks like when you go in. See this beautiful pattern, these big population spikes, and then the fast discharges. And the third one, this one has huge population spikes preceding the seizure. In this one, you have also the fast, low amplitude discharges and very nice spiking here. Again, amygdala, hippocamp, temporoparietal areas. Yeah. So here you see the big zoomed in population spikes, etc., etc. Okay, that's what I wanted to show you. You saw 3 seizures. Yeah. 1 is real, 2 are simulated. Which one is which? 1, 2, 3. Were you able to tell? The experts, maybe. Seizure 3. Seizure 2. Seizure 1. Reason I'm showing this to you is to show you essentially to what degree of detail we want to enter here. We will talk bifurcation theory, but we are less interested at having sinusoidal discharges. The complexity is elsewhere. Yeah, this is the complexity we are after. Any guesses? Well, I leave it like this. Seizure 3 is a real seizure. All other seizures are simulated seizure of a patient. Yeah, of a patient simulated, but no use of any functional data. It's a fully autonomous simulation. A little bit like the video that Randy showed, that I showed, etc. This is a level of sophistication on which we want to work. Yeah, I've showed this also for Habib, because you asked me, are we simulating only the envelope functions? Actually, no. We're simulating seizure variability within a patient to the degree that we are actually able to make a clinician recognize his or her patient's different features, because as a clinician, when you treat your patients, you know the seizures of a patient. Yeah, so that's one thing, one kind of insight I wanted to share with you. Yeah, and also to get you a little bit, we will talk about many simplifications, and often it's going to be heavy simplifications, but then again, this is on the level where we want to, on the platform, the level on which we want to work, because it is this level where we can do inference. Yeah, But the simplifications we do in order to understand, that's what we will spend the hour here, but this is what we are aiming for. Yes, please, Andrea.
Yeah, so just a question, not an expert. So what about the muscular activity? So the artifacts.
So the artifacts, yeah.
Yeah. So
Those I put in by hand, of course, in the simulated seizures. We're not modeling the muscles, no. And how did I put them by hand? I said, my dear PhD students, Timothée Pro in this case, yeah, go into real EEG data, do a stupid ICA, extract the artifacts, take the template, put it in the model, and manicure the data so it looks real. So when Andrea comes and tells me, then so he doesn't think, he didn't have an artifact, so it must be the simulation. That's nice to play a little bit, but the gist is, this is what we can do. But in order to get an understanding, we need to go to simplifications. One aspect, and we can stop at any time. We do different topics. One topic I wanted to address with you is the following. When we analyze this type of data, this goes back this lovely review paper by Olaf Sporns and Ed Bullmore about graph theoretical analyses, yeah, of data. And several of you have mentioned clustering and the different connectivity indices. Yeah? This is being applied on the structural domain and on the functional domain. On the functional domain, you build a functional connectivity matrix, and then you analyze it. Same thing you do with the structural matrix. We discussed random matrices for connectivity. Yeah, so this is a way to characterize them. I have a question to you again. Yeah, what is centrality when you have a hub? Yeah, why is that important? What is the underlying assumption? It's a real question, actually. What does it mean? All the connections are going in. Why is that relevant? Yeah. The way it's being done. Yeah. Any ideas? I can continue talking, but it's more fun like this. Yeah. It's essentially when something is tightly connected, yeah, and you assume you have random activity everywhere because of the connectivity, its symmetry is being broken, and it receives more information or more activity than others. For the afferent fibers, and for the efferent fibers, it's sending out more, yeah, because it has more connectivity, assuming random activity distributed everywhere. Yeah, so we are thinking of a kind of a, where is the gentleman that spoke about particle wave yesterday? That was you. Ah, yeah, okay, yeah. So particle, so it's a kind of a particle picture of information. Yeah, the stronger connected, the more particles are coming in. In a sense, you could say if X is element Rn, so a higher dimensional element, you can say we have an n of x plus a summation j w. Let me put an index here, xi ij times whatever function, let's say an activation function xj, something like this along this line. And we want to characterize the properties thereof. Yeah, and this is the input. What is happening in there when we are trying to characterize this? In reality, please recognize what we do in the real world is actually we assume a fixed point. Because when we perform a graph theoretical analysis, we are not taking the brain state dependence into account. Every single index that comes from this is always like a centrality. Yeah, it sums up these elements that are coming in there, and we assume it's important because it increases, in this case, the way I wrote it, the stationary solution of this one. Xi dot equals 0, xi equals whatever comes up here divided by epsilon. This is kind of the underlying assumption. Now, what we ran into with the virtual brain is there are time delays by propagation. Yeah. What does the time delay do to this? This is another. Did I touch it and did I do something wrong? No. Okay. I didn't know if it's a touch screen. No, it's not. It was you. Sorry. Classic scientist. Is it reproducible? Time delay via propagation. So essentially, we have something like this here. Xj t minus tau ij. This is what we're dealing with. Time delay typically does not play any role in a system where we have a stable fixed point solution. It can destabilize a system, it can, yeah, but this is the only activity that it can have, yeah. The key question is here, what, with the time delay, we saw also some of the the discussions yesterday, it can cause changes, yeah. However, if I look at this activity here, there is absolutely no contribution of the time delay, but the time delay changes the communication pattern in the large-scale brain network. Is there a way I can actually include this in this representation? Yeah, and this is actually what I tried to do on the next slide. Essentially, we run into this situation here. There I took a difference term, yeah, but Randy, he wrote it down as a tensor. He had this fancy figure. I'm not sure if you processed that. That looked like this. You had, this is connectivity omega ij. This is a matrix, essentially. Yeah. And then he had the time delay tau ij represented here in different elements. So this is essentially what we are dealing with. It is a tensor. Yeah. Omega ij times tau ij, and usually it's empty, except of whenever you have a single fiber. Connectivity matrices are always sparse matrices. Yeah. So is there a particular way of dealing with this that we can actually include that and perform a graph theoretical analysis? And the question is, actually, it's important because the communication does not depend only on the incoming connectivity, but it also depends on the communication via time delay. If this is not a fixed point, but if we are dealing with oscillations. But look at the simulations that we looked at. Look at what the data that we saw yesterday. We're dealing with oscillations all the time. Is a fixed point model of this type here the right approach to describe an oscillatory system? Question mark. Oh, yeah, obviously not by definition. However, this is the underlying assumption. So the graph theory, you characterized your system by this approach yesterday, but it's an oscillatory system with time delays. A time delay can change the nature of the connectivity. If you have an oscillation with a frequency t, and the time delay is t half, you flip the nature from excitatory to inhibitory after the propagation time delay when this signal arrives here. So you deal with a synchronization, but it becomes anti-synchronization. You change your connectivity matrix. So you have a false estimation. How can we overcome this? We have to change the underlying model. When we deal with oscillations, the correct assumption, but one way of thinking about this is to think of it as phase-coupled oscillators. This here is also okay, but you have to be there on the synchronization level, but it's better to take it into account here, yeah, because Kuramoto oscillators or phase oscillators are the better descriptors of oscillatory behavior. But that makes it frequency dependent, which I don't have here, but I have it here. It becomes frequency dependent because phasings depend on the rotation frequency that you have on the limit cycle. Yeah? So this we can deal with. This here is the standard equation for a Kuramoto oscillator. You can have multiple nodes, you couple over that. It's always the first expansion. You can have higher order terms, sine 2 phi, 3 phi, 4 phi, etc. But this is a first order expansion. Kuramoto has very nicely shown that whenever you have a closed orbit, and if you stay also for non-planar systems around the closed orbit, within like a Cauchy band, you stay around the closed orbit, that there are certain properties in terms of phasings, approximations, that go then down on the same closed orbit. Yeah? And this you can describe by a particular dephasing value. Yeah, that provides us with the dephasing value is typically a dispersion of two frequencies. So if we take this expression, omega-1, omega-2, then you can compute and you have only two oscillators, n equal 2 from j equal 1 to 2. It becomes almost a triviality, theta j minus theta I. You can compute actually the phasing by setting theta I dot equals theta j, theta 1 dot equals theta 2 dot equals 0. And you can compute the phase value that if the coupling here is positive, then this will be an attractive fixed point. This is well-known knowledge. You can generalize this also. You can generalize this to, I think I did not write this down. Oh, no, it is actually this equation. So this term generalizes to this particular expression. And please note that your coupling term, omega, here it's being renormalized by omega tau, by the frequency, and tau being the time delay in reference to a particular frequency or period. Yeah? So it's specific, which makes sense when you have alpha, beta, or gamma oscillations. Yeah? It depends on the time delay in relation to the particular frequency. So this you can do. And there is a minus I that under very many conditions disappears. Yeah, but that's not my point here at the moment. My point here is under synchronization conditions. Yeah, you have again a renormalization of this coupling term here. And this is actually what we are after. Again, you could argue, yeah, now you could be in phase and an anti-phase, etc. But that's the same discussion we had here. It can be in the down state or the up state. We're not taking the nonlinearities account. In the normal graph theoretical approach, we have the kind of hidden assumption that we are looking at a solution that is a fixed point solution, and we want to know how much of the packages that come in, yeah, whether we can find a good weighting to describe that. And for oscillatory systems with delays, we can do the same thing, use the same mathematics, but actually then propose a first for synchronization patterns, a first renormalization term for the wave coupling, which is this one. Yeah. Please look at this. For cosine 0, if the time delay is almost disappearing, this expression is 1, and we recover the normal graph theoretical approach that we know. For going to cosine pi half 0, cosine pi, it can become negative. So we can actually have positive and negative values. No problem. Graph theory can be expanded to positive and negative values. And that then actually can change the summation. Typically clustering index, in degree, out degree, all these indices that you know, they are typically summations over values. But then suddenly now it's plus and minus values. And you can have, for instance, an averaged in degree that happens to be 0 because it sums up, because delay information comes from all over, but with a particular connection topology. And you ask me about topology. Yeah, there's a particular connection topology that is such that if the entire network is synchronized, the incoming activity for this one happens to be 0 because the time delays are appropriately represented. This you can capture by this type of renormalization. And this has consequences. Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so
This gives me.
So substantially, your formula there is telling you that I can englobe everything in the coupling. So I can have an effective coupling, Wij, right?
Yeah.
And then forget about the time delay.
Then forget about everything that Randy said yesterday in terms of tensor.
Yeah, and then have just everything included in Wij.
This is essentially what you can say. Yeah.
Okay. So now my question is this: it's probably I'm behind the literature, but so when this first coupling was introduced, right? This time delay, they were taught the way that it was calculated, it just by taking the Euclidean distance between two regions and then divided by the velocity of transmission, right?
Yeah.
But of course, that's very rough approximation. This is not the case, right? You cannot just calculate the ideal distance between the regions.
Well, you can. The question is whether it's correct.
Well, you can, of course. It's just the
There are
point.
good approximations coming from F-tract, for instance. Yeah, things like this. Yeah,
So then-
but these are the values between 3 to 10 meters per second.
So right now, the approach that you're using right now, are you calculating? Because substantially is what's the point to calculate, to do a good job at the connectum level, if then I do a poor job in estimating the time delay?
Which error matters more? This you have to do it in order to figure out which error starts being the dominant one that you do. Yeah.
So the time delay right now, we're calculating using the exact length of the fibers.
Yes, the track length of the fibers, not the geometric distance, but the track length, at least in our hands. Yeah, yeah. I wanted you to be aware of this because many people don't know that. So it has consequences. I'll give you an example. This is, I think, data from the human connectome. Yeah, human. This year's mouse. A normal functional connectivity matrix. Yeah. Yeah. So now, if you take this into account, the renormalization, yeah, you can get negative values that enter, and it becomes frequency dependent. Yeah. Number one, for very fast, as we just discussed, propagation, it becomes the classic functional connectivity. So you see, first of all, that just by visual inspection, it changes. It also changes some of the results. So this year is in terms of the graph theoretical metrics, for instance, the in strength for 5 Hertz or 30 Hertz, yeah, you have a bias towards the shorter fibers, actually. Yeah, it's one thing. Or dynamic core. So this comes from Olaf's lab, who has actually estimated using the Rich Club approach and the dynamic core of the human connectivity. This is the original result, but it starts reorganizing when you look actually at the spectral features thereof. So it has an effect, yeah? And if you now put it, so there is no virtual brain in there, yeah? But this we have to know in terms of approximations or in terms of analysis. When we perform simulations now with a virtual brain, you can perform a resting state. And this is a good estimate from the literature, yeah? And there is a particular variability. You can reconstruct 100 subjects from the human connectome database, yeah? And you can perform a normal analysis. Here you have the frequency bands for the different lobes and the spectral features. Here you have capacity, you have the spectral power, and you can, for instance, project it, as has been done yesterday, on the different resting state networks, different frequency bands. And interestingly, certain features that come out, look at the visual network, yeah? A huge resonance for the alpha band, yeah, coming out of pure. Please note, there are no functional data here at all. It's a resonance properties coming from the connectome and the time delays, yeah, without any functional data, yeah, that is coming out of this. This is a Sparse-Petkowski always refers to corpus resonantia. Yeah? There are certain properties that the connectivity supports. But careful, not the connectivity without time delays. Only connectivity with the time delays supports certain preferred frequencies, the most outstanding one being for the visual network, the alpha band, yeah? With a very high significance. I wanted to share this part with you. Yeah, that's one element. That was already half an hour. Yeah. So, what else shall I talk about? First principles, symmetry. I want to talk a little bit about symmetry breaking and emergence of SFMs. I wanted to talk about neural fields and maybe applications to resting state. This definitely not. Let me talk a little bit about first principles and symmetry, as we discussed yesterday, and see if there is some useful knowledge in there. Spatial temporal patterns this year. you know it probably from many publications, Pauli-Benard experiment, Navier-Stokes equations. You have a three-dimensional system, you heat it from below, it cools on the top. You have a delta T, which is a critical parameter. Delta T, you increase the difference between upper temperature and lower temperature, and at some point you have convection, experimental pictures. Convection means molecules moving up, cool down, go down, heat up, and it organizes itself in roll patterns, experimentally or in simulations, driven by noise, and you see there is a preference towards either vertical or horizontal roll patterns and then stays in there. So these are fixed point solutions that can be computed. These are typically spatial tempo equations. And here, the framework, the way we understand it, is you have ordinary or partial differential equations. You typically have a control parameter. You have a nonlinear system with lots of interaction that provides flow of information, mass, energy. In this case, it's energy, the delta T difference that drives the system. It's non-specific. Nothing imposes a roll pattern in there. It arises from the interaction term, from the drive from the outside. And then at a certain parameter ranges, typically at critical parameters, at bifurcations, you have exactly this here happening. A low-dimensional dynamics arises. In this case, it's two-dimensional with the classic perturbations. So you have a low-dimensional system that was called by Hermann Haken, that was mentioned also yesterday, order parameters, and what he referred to as enslaving. And this enslaving is essentially, mathematically speaking, the local center manifold theory. So through timescale separation, you have the emergence of low-dimensional subspace. This is Hermann Haken. Low-dimensional subspace, the dimensionality being much smaller than this system here, on which then certain flows can organize themselves. What he was suffering from a lot is the fact that you always had to go close to a critical bifurcation point. Yeah. So as soon as you're far away from that, the arguments of reduction towards the low-dimensional subspace, they don't hold anymore. Yeah. So there must be other principles that are actually underlying this particular organization, and one of them is symmetry. And here, can you see this? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, yeah, it's okay. Yeah, sorry. So this is a picture that Randy showed yesterday. Symmetry. Yeah, symmetry can generate invariant manifolds. Yeah, subspaces on which, when you get attracted, so the attractivity you have to impose, and on there you have no flow on there. When you break the particular symmetry, symmetry being defined as essentially a symmetry operation. So you define a group operator that acts on solution of the system. In this case, every solution that is on the manifold maps on the manifold itself again. Yeah? When you break this symmetry and you stay within the neighborhood, yeah, the system by definition on there. So if the symmetry breaking is small, and it can be the connectivity, as you stay close to the symmetric situation, the manifold persists, exists, but a flow on the manifold itself is being created. The manifold itself is being defined initially by all the invariant points that are on the manifold, corresponding to this particular equation, sigma being now the symmetry breaking parameter. The stationary solutions that are on there, omega 0 being the connectivity, can be all-to-all connectivity or no connectivity, just set omega 0 to equal 0, plus deviations from it. Yeah? And when you do this, you can actually compute the stationary solution, yeah, plus deviations from the solution in the subspace in which the manifold is spanned, plus other deviations. And the other deviations are essentially the other dimensions that reduce down to 0 on top of the manifold. Yeah?
So breaking the symmetry in the graphical theoretic point of view, it means it corresponds to cutting edges, for example.
Yes, for instance, or strengthening edges, certain edges, or removing edges, something like that. Yeah, this is what can happen. Yeah, the cool part around that is actually now you can expand around that. Yeah, you can take the equation, you assume the existence of this subspace. This you have to verify then afterwards, but you assume so you take the stationary solution in which the manifold is defined. By definition, it disappears to zero. Then you linearize around the symmetry point. Yeah, so Cij being the connectivity. So you have a smallness parameter, that's this particular deviation here. Yeah. Plus you compute the variation around the manifold, and in fact in the manifold, yeah, Q0. So that's the first order term, which is essentially Q minus Q0, yeah, and you allow this to be a variation, yeah, and that means you can actually take these elements into account. The geometry of the manifold is here, representing the geometry of the manifold plus its deviations, yeah, and this here prescribes the flow in the manifold plus higher order terms. So here it does not depend necessarily on a critical point, but it depends on a critical function actually, which is the geometry of the manifold. Let me illustrate this to you in the following. And essentially this operation, yeah, as long as delta Q stays within the manifold, you're essentially, this is the definition of the symmetry operator. You're not moving the, you're not leaving the manifold for the completely symmetric situation. Yeah, these systems are called equivariant systems. They have been around for a couple of decades, not too long, but for a few decades they have been investigated. Yeah? And I'll give you an example. Let me jump this up a little bit. I want to show you this to give you a very clear example on what we're talking about. Two-dimensional system. Yeah. Set this to 0, x dot equals 0, y dot equals 0. You get two null lines, state space, x and y. If fx equals fy, here I chose a circular null line. Yeah, very simple essentially. Fx equals x squared plus y squared minus 1. Yeah, I don't know if it's now positive or negative, but this will determine the stability properties thereof. Yeah, sorry. Times x, and this one should be times y. Yeah, my apologies. Oh well, no, it's not wrong. Actually, it remains correct because if I define it like this, yeah, they are overlapping. Now I break the symmetry, whatever I do to the system. Yeah, when I do this, by definition, the null lines are not overlaying on each other anymore. Yeah, however, they are still close. There may be intersections at this point and at that point. By assumption, this is attractive, and in the neighborhood of the two null lines, the flow must be very slow, which means you have a clear timescale separation. And you can actually compute the properties of this, red indicating here a stable fixed point and black unstable fixed point. And I can do this systematically. Here I have multiple intersections coming from simulations, plus just a particular deviation here in this particular form. Yeah, and running some simulations, always attractive, going from different directions, individual fixed points. Yeah, these are the corresponding time series. So you see, by definition, it's actually spanning a manifold in this two-dimensional space, now driven by noise, and this is what we see in the data. It's sampling the manifold with a particular geometry. Yeah, And it needs to be unfolded in this particular regard. Yeah, I can do the same thing in higher dimensions, the manifold being now a sphere with appropriate deviations. Can you see kind of what the dynamics is here? Just from the data? One fixed point, another fixed point, attraction down to the manifold, hanging out here, graduate student coming in, performing a stimulation, getting it off the manifold, and going down on the other side of the where the fixed point is. This is the geometry. Yeah. Stimulation, one fixed point, other fixed point. This is exactly this system. This system here is called a Haken-20 system, yeah, which has a particular symmetry. It's a cubic, and you can actually reduce it. And you can solve it analytically. Once you project on the manifold, you can operate in the coordinates of the manifold, and you can actually treat this dynamics completely analytically and compute the two fixed points, including the Fokker-Planck equation that goes along with it. Yeah? And this was in, oh no, that was already in 20 dimensions simulation, reduced to a three-dimensional subspace, yeah, reduced to a three-dimensional subspace and two-dimensional hypersurface, in this case, a sphere. Yeah. So this is the type of manifolds that Randy was talking about yesterday. You can derive this actually from networks, from population level networks. I'm skipping that part that was in another section that you saw in between. These are Janssen-Rid-like systems. I can show this very quickly. Janssen-Rid-like systems. Maybe I should this. Do you know by heart what the phase flow topology is of it? Janssen-Rid, Wilson-Cowan, Wong-Wang, all the population models that we're dealing with. Yeah, they typically have a stable fixed point, another stable fixed point, this one being a spiral, this one being a stable fixed point, and then you have a separatrix here. Yeah, and yeah, this is so you have a downstate and an upstate, where this one is oscillatory. Yeah, and typically the null clines look somewhat like this. And this is being the other one. Saddle point, hop, stable, fixed point. And then depending on what you do, you can generate a saddle node bifurcation here or a hop bifurcation here. This is already also close to a hop bifurcation point. This one, you can approximate by a downstate and upstate project on this particular line here. Yeah. And then you can build systems. Then you can build systems out of which you can create this type of emerging network dynamics systematically. And it's always the type of n-sphere that arises. You can show this actually analytically, which is pretty cool, which provides you certain geometric constraints in the state space. Yeah. I can show you later if for those that are interested in this. I wanted to show you one last aspect with regard to this. Sorry, I'm being conscious of time. This is a co-simulation of the mouse. I don't think I want to show this to you. In the remaining time, I can either go now, take this framework with the symmetry and start explaining in more detail the symmetry breaking through the connectome and how the manifold changes in the resting state, or I can go on neural fields. Any preferences? Symmetry? He prefers. So we do this. So what Randy spoke about, then let's go in the, and we stay on the symmetry prod. Yeah. This is a picture that you have seen yesterday. This is the functional connectivity dynamics. Can I remind you of what functional connectivity dynamics means? Time and time, and this is a matrix. It's a cross correlation matrix of subsequent functional connectivity. So you have brain activity, you compute the functional connectivity matrix, and then you shift it in time. Yeah. And then you compute, there is a time delay between functional connectivity you compute at one point and functional connectivity at another point. These are two matrices. You can compute the projection of one on the other, the cross correlation. This provides you one point here, somewhere here. It's just one point. And then you do it for all times. And then you have what is being referred to as FCD, functional connectivity dynamics, or Randy called it fluidity. Yeah, this is what it looks like. This is fMRI data, by the way, which means this is 20 minutes, which means the time from here to here is, let's say, 3 minutes. During 3 minutes, the functional connectivity does not change. And then within a few seconds, it drops down to close to zero, the correlation, and something happens. You go somewhere else in state space. And then you're hanging out in the same state space again for a few minutes, and then you reorganize again. It's a second order matrix. It's not fantastic, but it changes over time. Yeah. So this is something you can do. Can we capture this with the approach that we just discussed?
So just a question.
Sorry, who's to okay.
The functional connectivity is calculating which time.
Typically 1 minute, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or 1.5 minutes in our hands for a time series fMRI of 20 minutes. These are good windows. Overlapping can be overlapping. It doesn't matter. You get the same results. Yeah. Yeah. We take the virtual brain again. Internal dynamics, population equation. This dynamics, downstate, upstate, nothing else. Make it a fancy Janssen rib, make it simple Wong Wang. So in this case, it's Wong Wang with oscillatory upstate, non-oscillatory downstate. This one is not in here for the current purposes, which means we have a lower resolution representation, connectome, time delay in there. Now there is a factor G, which you see represented here, from 0 to 0.3, etc., going up. Yeah. So for G equals 0, what is the geometry in state space? In terms of the, no, not geometry, the data cloud, the statistics. For G equals 0, we have only this, but all the nodes are there. What does the statistics look like? Louder, please. Yeah. Yes, but if I were now to, if I now draw a state space of every node in one point, another point, I'm not plotting functional connectivity, I'm plotting activity. What does it look like? It's symmetric, and you have no symmetry breaking there. I can write mu times G. Yeah. The connectome does not break the symmetry. Can be all-to-all coupling or can be 0, as we discussed earlier. It's invariant under the group operation, so it must be spherical. Yeah. And this is actually exactly what you find here. The subspace reduction, it actually fills the entire space, state space. You have the downstate and the upstate. You cannot see this, but it's spherical and then driven by noise. So you have actually a spherical, the hypersurface that we saw earlier. Here you have it in a 164 dimensional system times 2, because this is a Wong-Wang system with 2 state space variables. This is coming from the simulation or from thinking, because we thought, we came to the conclusion, and we knew what the result was. This is exactly what the simulation shows. Then we increase the impact of the G. This is what you see here. And you represent the covariance. So fluidity for this point, fluidity for that point. So FCD, and you see where you get to the sweet spot where you have the maximal richness of the fluidity at this point. G is being increased, and the geometry of the manifold changes. Also, the flow on top of the manifold changes. At the critical point, it has this particular structure. The visual impression changes depending on which subspace you project. Yeah, but the geometry in the flow remains the same. But you can do a PCI, you can do nonlinear approaches to unfold the data, but you need to unfold the data, and then you go here. In here, you have the slow dynamics that we discussed on the manifold, which, given what we see in the fluidity, needs to cluster. You have to have certain types of activities in there that with a particular longer dwell time. This is exactly what we find also in the simulations. Yeah, this is the main manifold as spanned in this case by principal components. This is the FCD as you go through, and this is then the occupation on parts of the manifold. And this is how the functional connectivity changes over time. So you can actually do this systematically using the very basic principles of symmetry breaking that we discussed earlier. You can actually even compute the manifold and the stability on the manifold systematically. And I want to emphasize that this is not specific for this model. Every population and neural mass model you can come up with will typically have this structure. There's only a downstate and upstate. You can make it more complicated, but the basic structure is like this. Yeah, and we run into a situation like this. What you can do, you can perform a stability analysis. Yeah, and on the graph, you can compute the Laplacian and extract the eigenvectors. So on a network, essentially, and in this case, the first eigenvector happens to be the one that goes from occipital to frontal. Yeah, and then you can analytically, as we have done it, well, on the previous slides, analytically, you can compute the fixed points and you can plot them here. And you find actually a decrease in stability going from occipital to frontal, implying that when you are driven by noise, you have the tendency to have avalanches or activities going from occipital to frontal. And this is being confirmed then by the simulations. This is plotted over in strength, and in strength happens to be, for the first eigenvalue, go also in this direction. If you look at the equations, in strength is the afferent fibers that are being summed up to the individual fixed points. And if the in strength goes up along this axis, the linear stability changes also. So you can actually understand where this gradient in the connectivity is coming from. When you do this, you can actually, in the simulations, you can actually compute across in strength or across this gradient a power of peak frequency because it's firing rate. Sorry, in the Wong-Wang system, the variable is firing rate. It actually goes down, as it should, along this particular axis. This is a very clear prediction, analytically obtained, computationally verified. If you go in SEG data and average this across, I think it was 30, 40 subjects, you can actually have a sampling of all the SEG activity in the entire brain across the different brain areas and identify the peak frequency and actually map it out. And here you have the summary. Same thing, yeah? Going from the occipital areas forward, not as beautifully as here, actually going frontal and then more medial. Yeah, but systematically the gradient you find also. Yeah, this comes from analytical calculations on an integral differential equation using an individual's connectivity. Yeah, and then verified in here. Even more, you can actually now check if this instability, changing instability, is actually being confirmed also in other types of data. Yeah, and this is the last thing I want to show you. Well, there are many more, but I told you that all of them, all the fixed points are stable, but you have these avalanches, or the capacity for an avalanche to go along this direction here, occipital to frontal. And in the simulations, you can reconstruct using the HCP database, Human Connector. You can actually reconstruct the virtual brain. This is coming from simulations, and what you find actually across the time, you find that there are across regions of interest, and there are different ways of doing it. You find fast discharges going across time that starts accumulating a line through the entire brain with little delays. Yeah, yeah. So very significantly, and you can perform some statistics on this, and you can also do it. The co-activation, you can compute this is actually what is being shown here, underlying co-activation events. So you can compute the so-called edge connectivity. How does the co-activation between two areas changes like this? You can obtain a better representation thereof. This you can do for two regimes, synthetic data. On the source level, neuronal cascades plotted over time. Please note here, these events that start clustering. So you have discrete events because of the changes in the connectivity. It's all simulations. Okay, let it be. Then you can map it on the bold data. So this is full activity. This is edge connectivity. This is something that Olaf Sporns likes to push forward, which is a time-dependent connectivity, but between two areas, but the same thing happens. Please look at this. And then the functional connectivity dynamics. Please recognize that in the simulations, whenever you have these avalanches, this corresponds actually to these areas where you are having the enlarged, you see this better for this regime, the enlarged squares in the functional connectivity dynamics when you're when you're in the same area in state space on the manifold. Said differently, you have an accumulation of events, which you can actually represent statistically and compute the correlation of one cascade to the other cascade propagating across this particular angle, coming from simulations. This is nice. Point is, now we can go to the animal data or to the human. Animal data, bold signals. Now you know what you have to look for. You go into the mouse. There we don't have source, we never have source data, but we can look at the edge connectivity and the cluster, the cluster activity. So the avalanches, yeah, that goes through there. And you see also here some of the stripe structures. You can do the statistics and compute the cumulation and correlate it with the functional connectivity dynamics in the empirical data. Please recognize that these avalanches, like in the simulations, correspond to the squares that you find here in the functional connectivity. And this is what Randy lengthily spoke about yesterday, that this is indicative for aging, etc. Now we know what is actually happening in those. Yeah? What is happening is you have avalanches going across this gradient in the brain network, following what has been predicted from the connectivity, and they are more similar to each other, as you see here in terms of correlation, event to event. So event to event means the edge connectivity, or event to non-event, or non-event to no event, non-event. Yeah. So you have a larger similarity of the cascades propagating through along the manifold whenever you have these squares. In the human, EEG data projected into source space, so not on contacts, regions of interest, simultaneously recorded with fMRI, Petra's data, simultaneous EEG and fMRI. Please look at the alignment here and how it maps on the fluidity in the data. We have not known that. We needed to perform all the analytical and computational work to arrive here in order to be able to understand what is actually happening in this type of metrics that nowadays we wish to use for applications in aging or pathology. This is what you see here. And that came from the analytical calculations. So personally, I find this very, very exciting because it started initially with the symmetry considerations. Yeah. Habib, if it's okay, I mean, this is some of the data that Randy already showed yesterday. Now you can take this as a marker for aging. But I think I'm going back into empirical data. I suggest I stop here, and essentially what I wanted to have told you, what the tour was that I gave you. Connectivity. How to quantify connectivity. Specific for virtual brains, very, very characteristic is the time delays. They change the way you have to look at this because we have the space-time structure. Be careful with the graph theoretical analysis that you perform there, number one. Then we go and look at this type of simulations. We see that the time delays can actually change the subspaces in which dynamics evolves. Yeah, Sparse calls this corpus resonantia. Yeah, but they are supported by the space-time structure. How are they being supported? If we take a network and remove all connectivity and keep it completely symmetric, there are some hyperspaces in which you have invariant dynamics. Yeah, as a fast, slow structure is being imposed when you break the symmetry. These spaces, if they are attractive, the dynamics goes into those, and then the rest of the dynamics evolves on them. The geometry of these are represented in manifolds that can actually be measured. And what we have in a very general fashion happening in the brain because of the downstate and upstate characteristics of the system, yeah, we are getting this type of avalanches that you see here that have been reported in other scenarios. But here, what we are seeing is actually, it's represented in some of the markers that are usable by our colleagues and that are being used in predictions of healthy aging, of pathological aging, and providing us with some insight what is actually happening. So this is a big tour going all the way from certain principles to empirical data. Yeah? I hope that was kind of interesting because we touched on a little bit of math, empirical data, context, what it looks like. Yeah. So let me stop here and thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Viktor, for this very exciting presentation. So I'm going to start.
Usually you finish.
Yeah, usually I finish, but okay, I'm going to start. So my first question is about the symmetry. Okay, and because the symmetry, you are developing a dynamic system around equilibrium point corresponding to the symmetry. And if you look at the development that you are proposing, it's close to having around the symmetry a representation of the Laplacian structures of the geometry. And it seems to me like not completely surprising that when you calculate the Laplacian, you get the information of the topology that you have behind this. This is what the Laplacian should show us. What are the invariant subspace that we are following? And your dynamic is completely underlying. You took the first component of the Laplacian operator, which is
the first and second.
Yes.
The second, yes.
And the second
subspace.
Absolutely. So you can completely follow also the different component of the Laplacian, showing how you are completely within this the space that you define, and this space is also the self-organization of the dynamic system. So if you look at it carefully, you get the organization and the space organization of the point that you have in a space. So there is a link with what you mentioned before about the self-organization. This is general comment about Laplacian and general development that you make around the symmetry, which is So it seems to me like a very important point. I mean, this also goes in the area of symmetry is a very nice concept that we can use.
We used maybe a very quick comment before we continue. We used the Laplacians, the eigenvectors there. We could have used some others, but those are capturing the best the connectivity properties, some of the topological properties of the connectivity matrix. So it works quite well, and it finds lots of interest very recently in the literature. So what's his face in Geneva? There he had a beautiful paper in nature communication, unfolding using Laplacians. There's a double name, Dimitri van der Wulp. Yeah, Dimitri van der Wulp using, thank you, using Laplacian eigenvectors. Yeah, and it works very, very well for resting state data.
Yeah,
yeah, and it works very well here, also in the math.
Yeah,
yeah, we can do this analytically.
Yeah,
which is the part that I wanted to emphasize because I find this wonderful.
yeah, I know this work of Van der Wulp. So yes, I agree. So there is a link between what he did and what you are presenting from the dynamic point of view.
We are
what
adding dynamics on
exactly.
This is what we do.
Exactly.
A particular structure
that
allows to completely exploit the symmetries in the system.
That's the conclusion. I agree. Well, you're adding the dynamic on this, so it's very important point. Another comment that I would like to make is you say, oh, following the geometry, so we can follow the different areas of the brain, and this is about the underlying geometry of the systems. And this comes to me like, okay, the geometry, you can follow it using the dynamic system, as you mentioned. But other people in other experiments, and I think it's completely related, I have never think about it regarding the dynamic system, but a paper published a few years ago, I mean 3 or 4 years ago, about the looking at in animals, about the implemented electrode in the motor system, and the mouse is in labyrinth, moving, and they look at the connectivity between the electrode, and just looking at the connectivity, they come up with okay, there is a matrix of connectivity, and they use the simplicial homology, looking at the characteristics of the this connectivity. This is again simplicial homology. It's also topology of the system, and the beauty of the result is that, oh, they can follow the trajectory of the mouse, which is yes, it seems like, oh, extraordinary, but following what you say,
is it Gilles?
I don't remember the name. I can
Manifold and the spatial coding of the location.
Of the location, yes.
He works also with manifolds, and
they work on the manifold, but
they did not take directly the activity data, but they took the ratios of frequencies. But in principle, the language is very similar.
Yeah,
and they are looking for subspaces that are relevant for the spatial code.
Which means
that's Gunnar Carlson. Gunnar Carlson using persistent homology.
Ah, okay.
so
that's the same idea.
But this is the same idea. That's what I would like to conclude, that the connectivity is okay. It's the geometry, and you are also catching this information based on your I just comment on this because I don't know if you know this work. I would like to just connect it a little bit, and looking at how we can look at the connectivity based on the development that you're proposing, who is completely original.
So make sure that we talk. Maybe we should exchange a few papers, and then make sure that we have the same papers in mind and verify that. But it makes perfect sense of what you're saying.
Okay. Okay, so that's my second comment, and I have one question about the now about the first part of your it's a time delay. When we look at the equations of the time delay, in those equations you are making or you mentioned Kuramoto model oscillator, and what you put in your model is yes, this separation between the time delay is like a weighting function on your model, and but writing this, I see a hypothesis behind which make like a separability between frequency and the amplitude. If you make this hypothesis, you can separate and you can make a weight on around xj minus xi. If you do this,
I get completely, by going into the Kuramoto system, I get completely rid of the amplitude. But that's what you mean.
Yeah, I agree. So this is the separability.
Yeah.
And this separability this is one hypothesis. I think it's a good hypothesis. Again, we are around the separability, but the system itself is not separable. I mean, frequency and the amplitude are going to move together, are going to interact together. So question for you is, when the model is heavily non-separable, what kind of result that you got with your model? Is it something that...
Okay. Let me first emphasize that I wanted to, with the Kuramoto model, I wanted to demonstrate that it makes sense to think about it in terms of Kuramoto, because we're talking about time delays.
Yeah.
That we're talking about what type of oscillatory behavior can a network of this topology support. By no means I try to model brain activity with it. I try to motivate a renormalization factor by the implicitly assumed relevance. Yeah. In this case, I wanted to convince you, time delays matters in oscillations, and we can actually renormalize it appropriately. As, and most people are not really aware of this, when you apply normal graph theoretical analysis, you have an assumption that certain thing matters. Like in the parcel picture, the incoming packages, increased afferent or in degree for increased afferent fibers matters. Why does it matter? Why do you say it matters? Or clustering, why does it matter? It matters because you assume that the topology is somehow linked to information processing. Which type of information processing? Information processing in a particular image. The more transport you get, yeah, this is what is being captured by this matrix. By no means I try to model brain activity through this. I want to illustrate what matters in the graph theoretical analysis in the normal world. And this is what I tried to do now here. Same thing when you introduce time delays, rethink what you're doing and understand what matters when you apply this renormalized connector. I did not try to model brain activity through this particular Kuramoto oscillator. I must insist on this. I try to motivate the renormalization factor as it can be motivated also in the classic graph theory. Yeah? Having said this, it renders your question a non-question, because with this model, I'm not trying to separate amplitude and phase. I'm trying to motivate a particular matrix. You see my point? Nevertheless, it's a fully justified question. And where is it non-separable? We looked at some of the seizure data. We have fast, slow systems. We have spiking behavior. We have pre-ictal to post-ictal activity or pre-ictal to ictal activity. Yeah? And then the evolution that you cannot separate. You cannot separate amplitude from phase behavior. That's the reason why I prefer to look at it in terms of topology, state space. Yeah. And topology not to be taken literally, because the spiral attractor that goes into the resting state, technically speaking, it's a closed orbit. Yeah. But what I'm more interested in is a slow, fast separation, and the areas in which actually under this type of approximation, the bifurcations occur. Having said this, when you do that, you must always consider amplitude and phase together, unless you go in certain subspaces of the state space, in which you then discuss locally in state space. We know that from nonlinear dynamics. Locally, you can discuss it in terms of the appropriate variables. Yeah, that's essentially what we do. Onset, we discuss the appropriate normal form for the bifurcation. Offset, we do the same thing, but like this, we are locally in state space. There we can separate typically. For the whole attractor, we typically. You ask a general question, I'm giving you a general answer.
This
That's
is
what it looks like in our.
I see your point. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So the model here doesn't take into account the topology of the structure network.
Yeah.
This is the beauty, I think, what it has proposed. So looking at I mean, inferring the topology from the dynamics, because they're close linked, and you can also follow in some cases, I mean, the different invariant from the topological point of view, which are the space, and looking at some information like exactly what I mentioned before, le labyrinth, and trying to find the underlying geometry.
Can I very briefly show you something?
Yeah.
And just one picture, which I chose not to speak about because we were running late, but this year, because you talk about topology, this is Claudio, who's actually in a 50-dimensional state space. Yeah. And there he has a low-dimensional subspace with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fixed points composed out of in a high-dimensional network, but all of them have the downstate and the upstate. So really the architecture that I was describing. And then he's generating EG data out of this. And he developed actually a technique how he can actually extract that using, I'm less familiar with that. It's a nonlinear decomposition, nonlinear trip, TNAT or something like this, some kind of mode extraction that uses some nonlinear constraints that he's actually able to expand this network out of that. This is 50-dimensional. So that provides us a possibility to go in experimental data and look for these low-dimensional subspaces that carry meaningful information. We happen to know that this is the right result because he simulated it. So he knows what the original architecture looks like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is actually very nice.
Yeah. Okay, but excellent.
Incoming with a list of questions.
No, this is mine.
Complex question.
Okay.
Here's 3 papers in this.
On 3 people. Okay.
Could you back to the slide you talk about the delay and Koromoto equation?
Yeah. This one should do, shouldn't it?
Yes. Did you determine a domain of approximation for the approximation you did here?
For which approximation? For this one?
Yes. Yes.
This one?
Because
This was more for motivation. We did not do this expansion. I wanted this. This you have to consider to be more symbolic because I wanted to motivate that this expansion, I can write this with a delta function and an integral and make it actually the tensor that Randy spoke about, but I don't want to do this. I want to collapse it. Yeah, I want to collapse it. And the way you can do it is when you are close to the we have to be close to the synchronization onset. Yeah?
What did
So you
you
can have a set of oscillators that follow, in the ideal case, a Gaussian distribution function on the circle. They're always on the circle, and the oscillators need to be unimodal.
okay? I mean, did you study approximation error?
No, not in this case. Yeah,
Okay.
but this, so the approximation to go from here to there. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yes.
No, I did not try to do modeling. I wanted to provide a motivation why I start with this equation. I did not try to derive this equation. I needed to have some lines of reasoning. Why is it reasonable to start with this equation rather than with a fixed point equation as we typically do it in traditional graph theory?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Last question, because we need to have a photo.
Okay, I can ask my question later.
You can
Yeah,
ask your
yes.
question later, okay.
Hang around until.
Okay, because
Are we done?
next person from the CRM is speaking, so.
Okay, let's
we
go.
need-
We're done.
Yeah,
Thank you very
that's
much.
Thank you.
So please stay here and we try to have the, okay, I let you organizing the